Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you here today for our webinar, Recruiting with Confidence in a Turbulent Job Market. I was toying with the word turbulence or chaos, and at the end of the day, it doesn't feel very different because it seems like our world has changed so much over the last 3 years. So I'm just glad to have you here. If for some of you that don't know me, my name is Tresha. I'm the founder and principal consultant of HR C-Suite. I'm a 30-year experienced HR leader that specializes in strategic planning, workforce planning, employee engagement, and improving recruitment results. We'd love to hear from you throughout the webinar. We'd encourage you to drop your questions in the chat and feel free to use emojis as you wish. Bonnie Jo Davis will be monitoring the chat for your questions and will bring those forward to us. So now I would like to introduce Jeff. Jeff launched his recruiting career at Hedrick and Struggles and Spencer Stewart. They are global executive search firms that I know very well. Today, he's the CEO of Chicago-based Recruit Rockstars. Along the way, Jeff has created 4 companies backed by $50 million in venture capital. Based on his 25 years in recruiting, he's authored the best-selling book, Recruit Rockstars, and you'll receive a copy of that just for joining us today. Jeff also hosts the 5-Star Recruit Rockstar podcast and is featured frequently by CNBC, Inc., Fortune, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. He holds degrees from Kellogg School of Management and the Wharton School. So help me welcome Jeff.
Tresha, thank you. Let's just do a quick audio and video check before we start. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Super. And you can see my screen, I hope.
Yes.
Great. Well, it's super to spend time with you all today, and I appreciate Tresha's kind invitation to spend some time. As she alluded, I think turbulent is the perfect word. I've been at this for 25 years, which I guess dates me a little bit, as you can tell from the gray hair, each of which was one recruiting project. I've never seen anything like this. So if you're feeling at all discombobulated by the state of the recruiting market, or even if you're thinking about looking for a job on your own or both, you're in very good company, because I've just never seen anything like it. So what Tresha asked me to do today was to kind of bring it back to basics on what is actually working right now, post-pandemic, pre-recession, perhaps, and certainly a very turbulent time. And so what I thought we'd do is chat for maybe 30, 40 minutes. I'd like to share some best practices with you. As Tresha said, this is being recorded. So rather than scrambling to write it all down, love for you to really engage with us. I love taking questions as we go. So just hit us up in the chat box and Bonnie will interrupt me and shout those out. You're going to get a copy of the book just for joining. So, and then we'll do Q&A at the end, and I'll stay on as long as you guys want. Does that sound like an okay structure, Tresha?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Well, why don't we dive in? I really have one primary objective today, which is to help you avoid making bad hires. If you are one of the companies that is still hiring in this very uncertain economic time, one of the single biggest costs, it's just disastrous, is making a bad hire. Now that's not hiring a bad person, it's just making a bad hire or a mishire. And what I've learned over 25 years of doing this is it is certainly possible to improve your batting average dramatically. And by the way, in a very short time, by doing some very simple things and doing them consistently and teaching your team how to do them as well, which is what made me decide to write the book and just kind of write down all these lessons I had learned over the years, many of which were mistakes that I had made earlier in my career. So here's the really sad statistic to start with, which is pretty disconcerting, and that is that 1 out of every 2 new hires in the United States fails. And what that means is if you ask the hiring manager or the HR leader 12 months later, are you happy that you hire this person? Literally half the time, the answer is no, which is pretty bad. I mean, what other part of your business would you be okay with a 50% success rate? It's almost inconceivable. That's basically like entrusting your hiring to a coin toss. In fact, you could skip most of the parts of the recruiting process and just flip a coin, and you'd have the same level of accuracy, which I think is just inconceivable. And I'm convinced it doesn't have to be that way. And so, our goal over the next hour is something that it's a really high bar, but I've seen it happen enough times that I know it is possible. And that is to improve not just your accuracy, but your team's accuracy from 50% up to 90%. Now, no one's going to be perfect in recruiting. You're dealing with human psychology and so many moving parts and competitive offers and things of that nature that are out of your control. But if you master the things that are in your control, you can dramatically reduce bad hires or mishires in your business. And that's true whether you're a recruiter, whether you're an HR leader, whether you're a CEO, maybe you're a consultant that advises companies. And I'd encourage you to really set that high standard for yourself. Despite the economic turmoil, the other part of the bad news is that it has never been harder. We are at a 50-year record low unemployment rate. It's 3.4% here in the US right now. And by the way, in some cities and in some industries, it's far less than that. We are at full employment, which basically means that job boards and posting a job and hoping the right person comes along and applies is not really a viable strategy, right? That works very well when you're at 7%, 10, 15% unemployment and it's raining candidates. Right now, that's not the case. And so this next hour will help you deal with that reality. Now, I don't believe in squishy things. We use the word rock star. You can use a top performer, A player, whatever you want to use. It's important to get really crisp on what does that mean? What is the person that we're trying to hire? And the definition that I use is to find someone who is in the top. Bonnie, I love that cat. Love it. It's someone who's in the top 5% of the market that is available at the price you can afford. So let's do that again, because all three conditions have to be met. Someone in the top 5%, not above average, not top 20%. I want a top 5% performer who's available, right? If they're not available, if the job's in New York and they're in LA, may not work, at the price we can afford, right? We all have a budget, especially now more than ever. And so we have to be very mindful about recruiting someone that we can actually afford. But if you do those three things, you will build an organization of winners. And I don't believe in this expression that some people seem to have, which is we'll hire a few A players and then we'll just have the rest of the team be B players and that will be enough. I encourage you to set your standard higher, which is to find a top performer for every single seat in the organization. And by the way, little known secret is when you do that, you don't need as many people in your organization. So I would rather have a team of 10 A players than 30 A and B players, right? Keep it small. By the way, you can afford to pay each of them more, which is why I use the expression, hire 5 top performers, pay them like 8, and you get the results of 10 or 20, right? And even Steve Jobs believed in that mantra over time. He just would not tolerate mediocrity. So let's get right to it. Over the past 25 years, I found that there are 10 key mistakes that most people make. And I've taken surveys for many years and found that for most people, it was 5 of these issues. So it's not just 1 or 2. What we're going to do over the next bit of time is go through the first 6 in some detail. You're going to get a free copy of the book, as Tresha said, and that will cover number 7 through 10. We're not going to race through these. So we'll really spend time on the first 6, but I encourage you with the book to to go through those additional 4. And we're going to dive right in. And we're going to start with the scorecard. So, what the heck is a scorecard? What I found is that most people have no idea what they're looking for. They're so behind the 8 ball, and they've waited so long. And Sally from finance quits, and now your hair's on fire. Oh my God, we got to find a replacement. And the hiring manager, they're all over us. Find me candidates, find me resumes. There's no time to stop and think about, okay, what are we looking for? And so the answer is a scorecard. So if you want 50% accuracy, you skip the scorecard, you just start looking at candidates, and you'll know it when you see it. And the reality is that does not work. What does work is stopping, and it doesn't take long. It takes an hour to think about what is it that we are looking for, and specifically have all 4 of the interviewers agree upfront. So I call this a little bit of go slow to go fast, right? The process is going to go so much easier and so much faster because we're not going to be having an argument at the 11th hour about which of the candidates is best because we didn't ever talked about what it is we're looking for. Now, before I move on, you see on the screen there 4 interviewers. And I'm asked this all the time. Well, why 4? Why isn't it 2? Why isn't it 20? You know, I'll be honest, I had looked for this answer for years. How many interviewers? And I would ask my clients, how many people are involved in the process? And I would hear everything from 1 to 30. Trying to get 30 people to agree on the weather is hard, let alone a candidate, right? So it turns out that Google did this study about 5 years ago. And Google's obviously a tremendous discipline of recruitment and a high talent standard. And what they found was this: 4 interviewers was the optimal number. Once you went over 4 with each additional interviewer, your accuracy only improves 1%. So if you go from 4 to 6 interviewers, it's about the same accuracy, but your level of complexity, scheduling, pissing off candidates, the experience, it gets much, much harder. So I'd like you to think about 4 interviewers. Now, they have to be the right 4 interviewers, and the book talks about how to pick the right 4 in your organization, but I'd encourage you to get them to agree up front on what it is we're looking for. And here's the step-by-step of how to do it. It doesn't take an hour. First of all, define success. What is it that we're looking for that is a home run in this role? If it's a sales role or a finance role or an engineering role, really get crispy and define what it looks like when the person crushes that role. So fast forward 12 months, what products have they shipped? What numbers have they hit, et cetera, right? That's possible in any role that you're hiring, whether it's a CEO or a client success manager. Second step, what are the day-to-day accountabilities that someone would need to execute to achieve that level of success? So if I'm looking for a sales rep who's going to beat her quota by 10%, $1 million per year, what would she need to do every day to hit that? Well, she'd need to make this many calls. She'd need to log everything in Salesforce, et cetera, right? Again, we can get very specific, and that could be a long list. That could be 10, 20, 30 things that have to happen all the time. Next step, what are the competencies that someone would need to have in order to do those accountabilities, which ladders up to that success? Competencies would be things like attention to ability to use Salesforce.com. Someone would need to overcome objections. Someone need to follow up with clients, things like that, right? Now, here's where most people go wrong. They're looking for a shortcut. And so the shortcut becomes, well, 5 to 10 years of industry experience. The reality is that does not ensure the person has the competencies. First of all, they might have worked at a company that was terrible or completely different than yours, even if they were in the same industry. And so don't take the shortcut. Go through the steps of figuring out what would those competencies need to be. Next step is, what is the DNA? Now I'm going to put a pin in this for a minute. We're going to come back to it because it's number 2, but it's equally weighted to the competencies. And then at the end of the day, we're going to score every person that we meet, and we're going to be objective. I like 1 to 10. You can use 1 to 100 or A through F, whatever you want, and never settle. This is the hard part, right? It's easy when you have a 1, 2, and 3, you disqualify them. 8, 9, and 10, we hire them. what most companies do, because they're so desperate and they're so late and they're so cheap, is they settle for a 4 or 5 or 6. They let that mediocrity into the company, and that's the beginning of the end. So don't settle. Now, what you want to do is target the right candidates to begin with. And here's another mistake. I'm looking to hire a CMO, a chief marketing officer for a company. Well, I want to go out and look at other CMOs who are in the same role with the same title, earning the same money. The problem is you have to ask yourself, why would that person who's in the same role with the same title, making the same money, consider a move to this role? And the answer is, in most cases, they wouldn't or they shouldn't. Now, there are extenuating circumstances. Of course, it's location, or their company's about to go under, they're running out of venture capital funding, whatever it might be. But what you're going to find is the majority of candidates either will say no, so you're wasting your time, or if they say yes, you kind of have to ask yourself, why are they interested? It's almost too good to be true. You can waste a whole lot of time with that candidate. Again, at the 11th hour, get a no at the end of the process. Instead, I have found the sweet spot to be candidates who have the skills and competencies. We don't care where they got them, but they have them. And in this process, I'm going to walk you through, we'll vet and validate that they have those skills and competencies, but they're currently earning 20% less than the most I can afford to pay. So in the US, the average person makes an 18% increase when they move from company A to company B. That's just the statistic. And so you kind of want to be at least in that range. And by the way, it's not just base salary, it's the total compensation package. Part of that is the title. Perhaps there's an increase in title or in responsibility. It's a 20% bigger opportunity. Just so it turns out a lot of that's probably going to be compensation. So really think about who you're targeting as you define that scorecard. Okay. So before we move on, Bonnie, any questions so far from the group on scorecard?
Not yet.
Well,
Great,
Jeff,
let's keep rolling.
I'll
Yeah, please.
ask you the statistics that you just cited for total comp and job changing. Have you seen that fluctuate at all during, the pandemic and then the after pandemic, if we are after, and has that shifted, or has it been pretty regular?
It doesn't change by much, but it does vacillate as the job supply and demand vacillates. So in a candidates market like the one that we're in right now at 3.4% unemployment, it tends to go up a little bit. Candidates can demand a bit more. When you're at 10% unemployment in the middle of a big recession or at the beginning of the pandemic, then the shoe's on the other foot. But it's been pretty consistent as long as I've tracked it.
All right. Thank you.
Again, because we're only talking about top performers, right?
Right.
It's going to be, you might get a C player who's willing to take, the same comp or even less. But for A players, for top performers who can name their ticket, 18 is the average. Okay.
Jeff, I do have a
Yeah.
question that just popped up.
Great.
Are those stats different by industry? For example, healthcare, tech, or other industries?
I've worked across levels, industries, and geographies my entire career, from West Coast to East, tech to healthcare, individual contributor to CEO searches that I do, and I haven't seen it change much. 18, 15, 20%, it's in that range. Top performers typically get in that range. You don't see someone double their income. That doesn't happen very often. Happens sometimes in the NFL, but not often. And then you'll see some people take a flat move, but that's the range. Okay, let's move to step 2. I alluded to DNA, and I really want to dive into it because this step unfortunately gets skipped almost entirely. I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So what most people do is they focus on things that they can get their arms around easily. They're looking for shortcuts. Did the person work in our industry? Did the person go to Stanford? Did the person go to Harvard? Did they work at Google or McKinsey? And the assumption is that because I can see those things, the person must be good. It's just, kind of guilt by association. We're looking for shortcuts. We're looking for markers. And I'm not saying that that's not a worthy activity. What I have found is that that's what most people do, is they do that and then they stop. What the smartest folks do is they also look at DNA. What is DNA? DNA is the single best predictor of how that new hire is going to perform on the job, what their day-to-day behaviors are going to be. If any of you are parents and you have two kids, like I do, and you know that their DNA is completely different, which is mind-boggling, right? Same DNA, same parents, perhaps, and they just behave completely different. In my case, I got a perfectionist, and I got one who's a procrastinator, and they really couldn't be more different. So I did a lot of digging on this, and it turns out psychologists have found that human beings, basically by age 8, we are fully baked, if you will. Our personality, how we're going to behave, has been determined. It's not predestined, it's nature and nurture and a bunch of other factors. But by age 8, barring any kind of life-changing trauma, you are the person that you're going to become. Again, if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. If they're going to be musical or creative or attention to detail or perfectionists or funny or whatever, right? Very hard to change DNA, almost impossible. You can train skills, you can train competencies, you can train a new hire if they have a gap in their experience, but you can't change DNA. And so if you hire someone that has the wrong DNA for your organization or the role, and they start on Monday, that's where the friction begins. And by 2 weeks in, 4 weeks in, you're like, oh my God, this is going to be brain damage, right? Because you're trying to change their behavior. I now weight DNA 50% on the scorecard. So in other words, half is skills and competencies, that's ability to do the job, and half is DNA, which is the ability to do the job in my particular company, in my particular industry. And the book in chapter 2 goes through an exercise with you of how to determine your company's DNA. It is not the list of bullshit values on the wall. That's not what I'm talking about. That's an aspiration, or that's just marketing in some cases. I'm talking about the 3 to 5 personal characteristics that you can actually assess in the interview process to determine if you are going to have to manage or micromanage this person, or whether they are wired in such a way to discharge the job, right? Quick example would be, I have clients that work in biotech, and attention to detail or that minuscule follow-up step makes the difference between life and death. And then I have clients that are, ad agencies where they're looking for people that are quirky and funny and expressive. Those two DNAs are completely different, right? And so you don't want to get that mismatch. So what do you do once you figure out your DNA of your company? You communicate it all the time. I work with companies to help them actually put into words and phrases and make sure that it is observable on the scorecard, so that we decline candidates who are great on skills and competencies but don't have the right DNA, or vice versa. They've got the right DNA, maybe they're missing a couple of skills. We can take care of that. We can get them training, we can get them a coach, a mentor, maybe put them in a different position. That hard to find someone whose DNA matches your company's. And then, of course, the hardest part is exiting those mishires, people who we hired, even if they perform, by the way, but they leave a trail of dead bodies in their path, and you know who these people are, and we look the other way because they make the numbers, but they are sucking the soul of the company and taking a ton of time and distraction from perhaps the leadership team or the manager. So that's a quick snapshot of number 2. The book talks a lot about how to figure out your DNA. But again, by the end of step 2, we've got a scorecard of what it is we're looking for. Half is skills and competencies, half is DNA. Any questions, Bonnie, Tresha? Okay.
Yes, I do have one. Does the identified DNA for an organization apply to all of the interviews, all types of jobs, or do they vary per job?
It's a great question. Your mileage may vary, but my experience has been that for a smaller company, let's call that under 500 or 1,000 people, everyone in the company should have the same DNA. That's not a lack of diversity, by the way, totally different topic. That's a candidate sourcing issue. When you get to a large company, I definitely see divisions have different DNAs. So I used to work with General Electric, which owned at the time, NBC and GE Healthcare and GE Aeronautics and airplane engines. Every division had a different kind of DNA, even though they were under the same company. But for many companies, I'd say most, because most companies in the US are under 1,000 people, I'm talking about one DNA across the board.
Okay,
Okay,
we do
let's
have
move.
one other.
Yeah, please. Yeah,
Do you have
please.
for one quick question? If you can
Yeah, of
only
course.
ask one question for DNA, what would it be?
Well, it's not a question. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to put a pin in that till step 5.
Okay.
How about that?
All right.
We'll
And
get
there
to
is
that.
a follow-up question. Where does DEI fit in?
DEI fits in hugely. That's diversity and making sure that we've got a diverse workforce. That is a candidate sourcing issue. So what tends to happen is I work with companies and I ask them, where are you finding your candidates? And they take me through it. And I'm like, well, there's no surprise. There's no diversity in your workforce. You're talking to the same group of people, quite often, old white men or whatever it is. And I help them find and tap into new channels, whether it's online, offline, historically Black colleges, whatever it may be, to balance that out. But that is not a DNA issue. That is a candidate sourcing issue. It's a great question. I get that one often. I want to go to step 3, just to keep it rolling. And then, like I said, we'll do as much Q&A at the end as people like. The job invitation. So now we know what we're looking for. And I frequently say that recruiting is not HR. Recruiting is sales and marketing, if you think about it, right? And so now we have to sell the best candidate on this role. We're only interested in the best candidates. And by definition, they're probably working. They probably are kicking ass. They probably get 2 headhunter calls or emails or in-mails every day. And yet I have to try to engage them or entice them or seduce them. Yet what most people do is they have these boring job descriptions which are just terrible. And you all have seen them. Maybe you've written them. And they are restrictive and they violate kind of every rule of marketing and advertising that you would ever conceive of, right? So everything from the headline and down to the call to action is just terrible. So here's the little trick, the little secret I've discovered. I always tell my HR clients, unless you're a brilliant writer, don't spend time on this. You can outsource it to your CMO, your company's marketing team, a copywriter for $20 an hour, who can create a masterful job invitation. Now, a job invitation is something enticing. It's that ad that you read that makes you say, wow, I'd love to learn more about that. Right? I'm not even looking, but I want to hear more about that. And the book goes through this, but there's things that are elements of it. So you want to make the role sound very challenging. A players want challenge more than anything. So you want to make the job sound super hard almost. But by the way, that steers away the C players. It's great. Video has to be part of the job invitation these days. And that's not a fancy video of your CEO with her suit on. It's, your top employees talking about what it's like to work at your place, and they're not scripted, and even some of the bad stuff about working there, which lends to authenticity. So you're going from a really crappy job description to a really engaging job invitation. It's kind of changing the mindset of what job invitations and job descriptions can be. This is a real one I saw recently. I mean, there's nothing about the industry, the company. It's just, we're looking for a customer service rep and they must have phone etiquette. What does that even mean? I mean, if you wanted to attract a C player, this is what you would post. And this is what I see companies do every day. Keep in mind that in your job description, of course, you're going to talk about the job, but you've got 4 things you got to talk about. The industry, because most of your candidates are from outside the industry. So why should I choose to invest my next 5 years in this industry? You might need to educate them on that. Then there's the company. Unless you're Apple or Tesla and they know what you do, you got to talk about your company, your funding, your investors, your momentum, your awards. Then there's the manager. We all know the expression that people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. Why is their boss going to be amazing? Did she win these awards? Is he best manager of the year? Whatever. And then finally, you're talking about the job. So your job invitations need to cover all 4. And what you find is you're going from an apply now mindset to a let's talk mindset. It's completely different. Apply now mindset appeals to the active job seeker? Well, we've already talked about the fact that no one's looking for a job because we're at a record low unemployment rate, right? So I always tell my clients, post it on a job board. You might as well, it's so cheap, but you're unlikely to find your perfect candidate that way. You need a let's talk mindset. So some other mistakes with job descriptions, way too many must-have requirements. There was a study in Harvard Business Review about 10 years ago. And what they found was that 98% of women and 80% of men are unwilling to apply for a job when they see that list of must-have requirements and they don't meet one of those requirements. It only takes one to throw them off the trail. So your list might say MBA required. And I say to my client, why is MBA required? MBA is not predictive of anything. I have an MBA and I wouldn't be able to do this job. And the client inevitably says, yeah, you're right. That would be nice to have, but it's not a must-have. And I cross it off. And I go through this exercise and I just cross off all these must-haves and I get it down from 17 down to 4. Well, again, most women, almost all, and many men will not even apply. And why is the answer? It's not that they lack confidence, it's they don't want to waste their time. They think you're serious, right? So don't include these must-haves and don't make this hostage negotiation letter. You must. Get it down to the basics. Second big mistake, you're not taking your scorecard and posting it. That is an internal document. That is not a candidate facing document, right? This is an advertisement. The scorecard is how you're going to assess candidates when they come along. And we'll get to where they're going to come from in a second. So 2 very different things. And then the third is most of them are boring as hell. So hire a copywriter, punch it up, and certainly use video. Now, here's the good news and bad news. The bad news is no one's looking for a job actively, right? We're at a record low unemployment. The good news is, I think it's great for us recruiters. Most of your employees and most American employees are not engaged. We're at a record low unemployment rate. We're at a record high employee disengagement rate. So if you can just find a way to get this job invitation in front of their eyes, they will be open to a conversation. That's what I do for a living. People pay me to get in touch with passive candidates, not active candidates. And it's absolutely doable because so many people are miserable for all different reasons that have been, in the media, the great unraveling or undoing of the job market. What do candidates want to know? They want to know what it's like to work at your shop, right? What is a day like? What am I working on? Why is it unique? What is the DNA like? And have some personal connection. I have a client that makes air filters, probably the most boring thing I could have ever conceived of. And what we found was candidates who had kids with allergies, oh my God, they thought this company was saving lives. And so we morphed a whole story around that. Very doable. You can do it with air filters. I'm sure we can do it with whatever you got. Okay, let's move on to where we're going to find these candidates. Number 4, networking. Now, before you start throwing tomatoes, because I know you hate networking as much as I do, I'm not talking about random networking. I'm not talking about going to cocktail parties. That's random networking, not a good use of your time. I'm talking about purposeful networking. So what most people do is they take the job description and they throw it up on ZipRecruiter, Indeed, or LinkedIn, and that's their sourcing strategy. And that does not work for so many reasons, not the least of which is you're missing the vast majority of your candidates because they're not actively looking for a job. What does work is tapping into your personal network, your employees' network, and advanced search on LinkedIn. If you're not a master of advanced search on LinkedIn, by this point, shame on you, because it's super easy and it's all there for the taking if you've got time. That's not to say every candidate is on LinkedIn, but 880 million profiles is a lot more folks than are probably going to see your job posting. So I've tracked this over the years, and here's the stats. Job postings, you're going to get 300, sometimes I get thousands of applicants. A couple of them, a handful, a small percentage are even worth talking to because it is so easy to apply on a job board. In fact, I've seen people There's actually software tools that will do it for you. They'll just click apply, 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 apply. It's like putting a rock on your return key, and it just applies for all these jobs. And so guess what? You now have to spend all this time going through your email box, and maybe you'll get a handful, and almost none yield a hire. Second would be a proactive search. It's a lot better, right? This is where we're developing a list of 100 people who seem to fit the bill. We proactively reach out to them. We'll talk about how to do that later. And you'll be surprised because many of them are disengaged. Just because you reached out to them, they'll engage with you. They'll have a conversation and you'll make some hires. Totally works. I do this all day long. But there's something even better, employee referrals. Now, you know this, I'm sure, but I'm guessing you may be missing some tricks on employee referrals. The stats are that you get 10 names, 10 folks, half of them are worth talking to, and you'll get some hires out of it. It is the holy grail of recruiting. In fact, there was a study recently where they asked HR leaders, where do you get most of your candidates? And of course, the answer was job boards, and some from my own company's website. Then they said, well, what is the source of your best candidates? And by far and away, it was employee referrals. By the way, looping this back to DNA, the reason is people hang out with people like themselves. That's just the way that we're wired as social beings. So if you have successful people in your organization, it is very likely that the people they know share that same DNA and are likely to be successful in your business as well. It is your single best source by far. Now, 1/3 of companies that I meet with don't have an employee referral program. So if you don't have one, put it in place next week, and I'll send you a PDF on how to do it. It takes no time. You don't need fancy software to track or any of that. That's not what it's about. But unfortunately, the 2/3 of companies that do have an employee referral program go about it completely wrong. They overcomplicate it. They're doing everything possible to make sure they don't pay a lot of money. And again, Google did a big study and found that you can double how much you pay and it doesn't move the needle at all. It's not about how much you pay. You can pay a couple $100. You can pay a Starbucks gift card. It's about the recognition. It's about paying it on the day of hire, not 90 days later. And there's a bunch of best practices. But most importantly, it's about how often you talk about it. You need to talk about it until you're blue in the face. Your CEO needs to talk about it until you're blue in the face. Make every person in your organization a recruiter and make it easy for them. And again, the book talks about how to do that. But I'm telling you, this is the holy grail. You get the best candidates. They stay the longest. Data backs this up. It is the fastest, and it costs the least, way less than an executive search firm or even job postings. So double down and make a goal of half of your hires, not your applicants, but half your hires should be coming from employee referrals. And I define that broadly. It's not just your employees, it's your vendors, it's your board members, your investors, your customers, everyone in your family, right? Your circle of trust, if you will. And that's a lot bigger if you're kind of creative and say, who has a vested interest in our business? And you add your ad agency, your accounting firm, and your law firm starts to add up. Okay, that's number 4. So now we're going to go back to 5, which someone asked about earlier, which is probably the single worst part of this whole process. I'm sure we all love it, which is interviewing. And I like to joke that until Elon Musk and artificial intelligence come up with a better answer, we're stuck with interviews. I happen to think that it's still a must-have. There's just no way around it. But if you're going to do it the right way. And I can assure you that most of your hiring managers in your company have no idea how to interview. And that's the reason is they didn't study it at school. They learned from their former boss. Their boss had no idea what he was doing. And so they taught them bad habits. So let's talk about some good habits. So what most people do is they completely waste the time with a random BS unstructured interview. And you know how this goes. The hiring manager hasn't even had time to look at the resume. They sit down on Zoom or in front of the person. First question is, so tell me about yourself, which is the most useless interview question of all time I've ever seen. And then from there, it's downhill, right? It's a random, unstructured, they haven't planned, they haven't thought about it. Data shows that if you use a structured interview, you're already far better It doesn't even matter what questions you ask. There's no magic questions. Everyone comes up to me and says, what are the magic questions? The questions are in the book. I'll give them to you. There's nothing magic about them. What is important, however, is asking them over and over and over, looking for consistent themes and patterns, and asking the same questions of each candidate so that we can compare against candidates. Because remember, I told you earlier, our goal is to score each of those candidates. Well, how do you score them unless you're asking the same things? Okay. So here's why all this is important. We're looking to hire a director of sales, right? Our director of sales quits. He gave us 2-week notice, and now our hair's on fire. The CEO's all over us. And then this candidate walks in. He's straight out of central casting, right? He's gorgeous and he's got the whole thing, right? He worked at P&G and he's got the confidence and the swagger. And unfortunately, everything we thought we knew goes out the window because we are human beings and we are subject to bias and perception. And unfortunately, many of us fall for it. If you don't have this discipline, and if your hiring managers don't have this discipline, it's just so easy to fall into these false perceptions. Again, data backs it up. Good-looking candidates are perceived as smarter and more competent. Taller candidates are perceived to be better leaders. That's why most US presidents are really tall. A deeper voice, higher integrity. I didn't get any of these things. So the point is that you can easily fall into this trap, and it's called confirmation bias. You guys know how this works, even if you don't know the fancy word, which is candidate walks in the room or hops on Zoom. In 60 seconds, we've already made our decision. Can you believe it? And then we spend the rest of the hour or two looking for data that supports our original hypothesis. Why do we do that? Because we're humans and we're never wrong. How could I possibly be wrong? So I'm only going to sniff out data that supports the fact that I think this guy's a winner, or this guy's a loser, or she's too introverted, or whatever it may be. The book goes through an exercise, a little game I actually play with myself when I'm doing interviews to dig super deep to try to overturn my original hypothesis. And I find half the time my original hypothesis was wrong. And I'm like, wow, she is amazing. Once you get her to open up, put her at ease. I'm not trying to make candidates nervous. In fact, I invest time to reduce the stress, just like on a sales call, get them to relax, be their authentic self. Most hiring managers and most interviewers, it's very intense, and it's about whether it's intentional or not, the candidate gets very nervous. You're not seeing the authentic, real person. So the book talks about how to do this. And there's 3 basic types of interviews. There's the phone screen, which is at the top of the funnel, of course, and this decides who we're going to even spend time with. Because once I decide to spend time, my organization's time with a candidate, that's many hours, which is many dollars. So it's opportunity cost. So what in 20 minutes am I looking for to even see if this candidate is worth a shot? Then we have the career deep dive. This is usually done by the hiring manager. And this, by the way, can take 2-3 hours. I've had some that are so long, we have to divide it into 2 sessions because the person has 30 years of experience or something, and I want to go through it in detail. And then finally, there's the DNA interview, right, which we talked about. And again, the book has the questions on how to do that. Most companies, whether they have 2 interviews or 20, they ask the same unstructured questions over and over. They badger the candidates with the same annoying questions. It leaves them with the worst candidate perception and experience of your company, which does have an impact. It's lower acceptance rates because the candidate is less engaged and less excited. So this is a dance. This is an orchestrated dance, and you can work with your hiring managers, the 4 of you, to assign roles and responsibilities. What are we looking for in these interviews? We're looking for 2 main things. How? I already know what they did. It's on their resume. I want to know how you did it. And I want details. I want specifics. And what I'm looking for is to see if the person was good or were they lucky? Were they in the room where it happened? Did they make the decisions, or did they just happen to be there at the time that the company experienced huge growth? And when you really peel back the layers respectfully, you separate those 2 groups. And then why? Why did you make that decision? Why did you pick that brand positioning? Why did you choose to spend your time with that one customer segment? You're getting insights into how the candidate thinks, how they ask questions, how they look at data, their judgment. That's what you're hiring them to do. And if they don't have those things, they're not going to be successful in your role, right? They could have just been lucky. But most importantly, focus on experiential, focus on the past, not hypothetical, future-looking questions. Asking questions like, what would you do if you got here? What would your first 90 days look like? The reality I've concluded is most candidates have no idea. They don't know enough about your business. They don't have the data. They don't know enough about your industry. They can't give a very good answer to that. What they can tell you is why they did what they did and how they did what they did. And then here's the worst part. Everyone's lying to you anyway. So we're going to have to use something better, which I'll get to in a minute, and reference checks to validate this stuff anyway. So Elon and AI, I hope they can do it. But right now, interviews are a big part of the process. And if you're going to spend your time, you might as well do it right. All the questions are in the book. You can share them, you can tear them out, give them to your team. I don't care. The key is to be consistent and create a structured process. Any questions, Bonnie or Trisha, before we go to number 6, which is the last section we're going to cover on this call?
I have one. Have you discovered that this process works with Gen Y and Gen Z?
It does. And I hire a ton of them. The biggest challenge I have found, to be candid, and I interviewed with New York Times 2 days ago on this topic, is job hopping. The average tenure is decreasing, and Gen Z and millennials are spending less time with companies, which makes it harder to interview and look at their results if they've only been with the company for 9 months or 6 months, right? Back when I was a kid, you were with the company for 4 years. I could really ascertain your promotion path and how you did and the numbers. It's getting a bit trickier in that result, but still don't not do the discipline process. Even if they have skipped a couple of jobs, even if they're a job hopper. Now there comes a point, and this is what I told the interviewer at the Times was, this is all about de-risking the hire. And I'm not saying that job hoppers are bad people. There's all kinds of reasons that they are in roles for short times, but just know you're taking a risk. If you're going to hire someone who's had 3 stints in 18 months, it's very hard to assess their performance because they haven't had to live with their own decisions, eat their own cooking, if you will. But no, this works for people age 20 to 120. Let's move to the last section before we open it up for questions, which is the test drive. Now, this is what you pay for. It all comes down to this, right? If the interview is the single worst thing or the worst predictor, and it is, every research study I've shown, interviews are at the bottom of the list. It is so easy to BS an interviewer. By the way, 71% of them lie. So easy to say, what happened to that candidate? They interviewed great, and they show up for the job, and you're like, oh my God. The test drive is the single best way. So let's talk about what that is. It is the number one. It's the top of every list that I've ever seen. What most people do is they rely solely on interviews. They're so desperate and they're so late and they have a good interview. They're like, stop the presses. How quickly can we get her an offer letter? And that's a big mistake. You're going to get a 50% batting average unless you do a test drive. Put the candidate through a test drive. What is a test drive? A test drive is the number one best predictor of how someone's going to do on the job because you're actually seeing them do the job. Whether it's for an hour or 2 hours or a day, I've seen some companies do a week-long test drive. I guess the best test drive you could think of would be a summer internship, right? If someone's at college and they come for 3 months at your company, you're seeing them in action for 3 months. That's like the best test drive there is. You can't fake it for 3 months. You'll see if their DNA matches the company. You'll see what their deficiencies and skills are and whether you should invite them back after they graduate. That's terrific. Well, that's not always possible. I can't take someone, Trisha's got a full-time job. She's not going to give me 3 months, but she'll give me a couple hours or she'll give me a day. And by the way, sometimes it's weekends or evenings. You work around the candidate's schedule, but it will de-risk the hire. So what is a test drive? It's seeing the person in action. Now, some of us probably hire software developers. And so we do a coding test or, we have them write some code. That's an example of a test drive. That's brilliant. I don't care if it's open book. I don't care if they take it home, because that's the nature of coding, right? You're using Google and you're using open source code, and right, that's fine. But most other companies don't do anything for the other roles: sales, marketing, finance, accounting, even HR. It's a shame. It is possible to design a test drive, a project, a working session, something that lets you see the person in action. Very different than what they told you in the interviews. Now they're actually going to have to do the work in front of you. Now, you do have to sell them on this. I've never seen A players resist this, because they sell it as an advantage to them. You're going to get to see us in action, just like we're going to get to see you in action. And there's going to be less surprise. You'll see if you actually love this job. That's one of the things that candidates want to do. And by the way, I don't call it a test drive. That sounds kind of arrogant. I call it a working session or a project. But the point is how you design it, and the book goes through how to design it. It's different for each role, different for each type of role. It's the best insight you could possibly get. But you can screw it up if you don't design the test drive comparable to the role. So if your sales roles don't have a lot of selling, not a lot of presenting, well, then having a sales rep pitch you on something, sell me this pen, not a great test drive, right? You need to replicate the role in some way. You're also not looking for a specific answer, right? Again, candidate doesn't have a lot of information. You might want to give them a dossier in advance to prepare them for that working session. But what you're really trying to see is, how do they work through a problem? How do they have attention to detail? How do they think about what data to look for? I've even found, and this is sad, a third of candidates can't even follow basic instructions, how to submit the results, or when or where, or by this deadline. And I take that as kind of the best I'm ever going to see from this candidate. So it's only going to get worse once they start. And so it's looking at all those things. And yes, you pay them if necessary, and it's almost never necessary. I find very few candidates will require me to pay them, but I'm happy to, because that money, $500, $1,000, is way less than the hundreds of thousands of dollars of making a bad hire. And by the way, A players love this stuff. It gives them a view into your company, and they love to show off what they can do. So it really does increase your acceptance rate. So we've covered the first 6 steps. I'm mindful of the time. We've got 8 minutes till the top of the hour. Like I said, I'll stay as long as you guys want for Q&A. What I will tell you is that this stuff, which is all in the book, is a discipline. It's like anything else in business. And it is a team sport. So it's not just you, but it's your team. Your hiring managers need to learn this, your new hires, anyone that's going to be involved. So here's the way to get the book for free. Just go to recruitrockstars.com/book. It's completely free. There's no catch. We'll send you a copy. You can share it. You can forward it, whatever you want, an electronic copy of the book. But I will tell you that it's simple, but it's not easy, right? I have made all these mistakes. I have gray hairs for a reason. And I just happened to keep track of what these mistakes were, and found that people made the same thing. So what I'd like to do is share with you something, because the book is for folks who have the time and the inclination to do it themselves. We thought it would be useful to come up with a very low cost, easy service for people that don't have the time to do it themselves. And that's called Shortlist. And Tresha was kind enough to put together a special offer that I'll share with you in a minute that makes this ridiculously cheap. And I'll go through it real quick, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Shortlist basically is a done for you service. The book is a you do it service. And Shortlist introduces you to 10 finalist candidates in 10 days. And the best part is it's 10 times cheaper than any headhunter, any recruiting agency. It is a fraction of the cost. And it's just a wonderful way to jump to kind of that last few steps in the process. You're still doing the assessments and the interviews, but at least you've got your short list of people to focus on. Job boards, as I mentioned, you're missing most people. You're missing 80% of the people that you want to talk to. And headhunters, of course, charge a fortune, which is why we came up with Shortlist, to kind of fit in between those two options. We introduce you to passive candidates, but at the price of a job board. So it's kind of, again, the holy grail of recruiting. And 300 companies use it and they love it. Works for any role that you can think of, and not just in the US, but outside as well, all the way up to chief level. Again, you'll meet 10 people in 10 days. So you know who to spend your time with as opposed to scrambling. And these are passive candidates. They're currently working, kicking ass in their current role, but for whatever reason, they're open to having a conversation with you. This is what a shortlist looks like. There's no software to learn. It's completely done for you. You just get basically a shortlist, a dashboard. You click on the person's profile, and then you just click on yes or no. Yes, I want to meet them. No, I don't want to meet them. It's almost like a dating service, like a two-way matchmaking service. And most people click on 8 or 9 of the 10. So it's super targeted. We find them in dozens of places, all of which I could teach you how to do if you didn't have a full-time job. It's super easy. They're on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and press releases and blogs. They're really, it's really there for the taking. And it does work for any role in your organization, software developer, sales, marketing, finance, all the way to chief level, even board members. So that's a bit about Shortlist. Like I said, Tresha put together just a great deal. This is one of the users who loves it. It's super easy. A couple days in your inbox. You're not getting 1,000 applicants. You're getting 10, and they're not even applicants. They're people that are currently working that want to talk to you, much like you would get from a recruiter, except without these ridiculous fees of $20,000, $30,000, $50,000. So Shortlist costs $4,000. That's regardless of the role, regardless of the level, regardless of the location. It's always the same, $4,000. But like I said, there's a special deal where you're going to use Tresha's code, and I'll give it to you in a minute, and your first shortlist is only $2,000. It's half off, which is just about our cost to provide the service. And people love it. So if you're interested in learning more, just go to recruitrockstars.com/Tresha, and you'll learn all about it. There's a video there. We can set up a call if you're interested, if you got questions. And it's really worked tremendously well. So I'd love to open it up for Q&A, if that's okay, Bonnie, and I'll stay on as long as you guys like, Tresha.
Sure, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, are you recommending people do the test drive in a co-working session on Zoom, or sending out an assignment which they would return to you off screen?
Yeah, great question. It depends on the role. If I'm running a remote first company and I'm hiring a software developer, it might be a homework assignment. If I'm a company in Chicago and we are in office, I've made that decision, and this role is always in the office working with their colleagues, then I'm probably going to do it in person. So it does, you want to really think about how you structure it. Now, sometimes, there's some people that can't get there in time, or there's some folks that are going to be on the call. Some are in person, some are on video. My key advice is to be consistent. So you put candidates in person will always do better than folks on Zoom, because 90% of body language or communication is body language. And so don't put some candidates at a disadvantage. If you're going to do them all on Zoom, do them all on Zoom. All in person, all in person. Don't mix and match.
Sounds good. Our next question is, we have a hire coming up that requires P&L responsibility. They're having difficulty preparing to interview the candidates. What questions could you recommend to get at this competency?
That's a good question.
Yeah, to get at that competency. Yeah. So, for those that may not be familiar, someone who's led a P&L management means they kind of run a business. That could be a product, it could be a division, it could be a whole company. There's different P&Ls. P&L typically includes responsibility for the revenue or the sales piece, which also includes marketing, but it also includes costs, right? The cost centers, which is the, then you subtract the two and you get the P, profit, or the L, loss. And so some of the questions you would want to ask, and the book does have a section on this, are around, I would separate those two, and I would talk about the revenue piece first. How have you built? Tell me about the revenue machine that you built at XYZ company. How did you do that? Why did you choose to do it that way? Why did you use your own sales force instead of an existing distribution channel? What were the lead generation mechanisms into it? So I'm peeling the onion. I'm going deep, really understand. And when you go deep, and you just not these surface level questions, the crappy candidates, they fall apart quickly, right? The problem is most people stick with these very surface level questions. They're almost afraid of insulting the candidate. I find the best candidates love to talk about this stuff. So we're doing it on the revenue side, then we're doing it on the expense side. So what were the three biggest categories of expenses in that business? And by the way, your best candidates are going to say, oh, it was, staffing and our office space, our real estate, and our legal expenses or whatever, right? Well, how did you negotiate those down? How did you choose that law firm? How did you choose to keep a real estate office when your competitors were all going remote, and see how they think? How did they reason through that? Did they do it because their boss told them to, or did they do it because they actually thought about it and had a process and a discipline? And so when you map together the revenues and the expenses, you're talking about someone who can speak and manage P&L.
That's a great answer.
Mhm.
The next question is, what level of vetting do you do with the shortlist service? So as an example, how do you determine they're right for the company to speak to?
Yeah. So shortlist, the goal of shortlist, which is super cheap and super fast, is to get you to that starting line where you do the vetting of DNA match. No technology, like I said, half jokingly, no Elon Musk, no AI can do that for you, at least nothing I've seen. I wouldn't entrust that to anyone. In fact, I wouldn't even entrust it to an outside recruiter because they don't know your company like you do. So once you are clear on your DNA and you've got your short list of 10 people, then it's just a matter of an exercise of, in those interviews, asking the right questions. So if one of your DNA characteristics is attention to detail, there are people in this world that have attention to detail, and there are many that don't. And there are questions you ask, primarily, tell me about a time when you have to have amazing attention to detail and you caught something that everyone else missed. Well, guess what? The right candidate with the right DNA will say, oh, yeah, so about a month ago, I was blah, 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 and I found this and it saved us $3,000. And then I say, great, give me another example. Give me another example. In 60 minutes, they will regale me with stories about their attention to detail. No resume can do that. No headhunter will do that. That is how you assess someone's DNA. So shortlist is not designed to do that for you. It's designed to get you the people to spend your time with that already have an interest in the role, already know the comp, you can afford them, already have seen the job spec and have said, yeah, I'm interested. Now you can focus on the DNA piece.
That's a great answer. The next question is, if we sign up for the shortlist and interview 10 candidates but don't hire, will you be able to send more candidates?
Yes. Yeah. Shortlist has a very low cost option, another $500, and you get another 10 people. So we keep at it until we exhaust the market. By the way, if we exhaust the market, that in and of itself is an indication that your hiring criteria may be off. So we do that as a courtesy.
Wonderful. Maggie's asking, how do you get the interview team to commit to the results of the scorecard? And who should make the final decision?
There are different points of view on who should make the final decision. Google, for example, the hiring manager typically does not make the final decision. And they do that because they don't want an emotional bond between the hiring manager and the individual. They want to be able to take that individual and move them around the entire company. Now, they're Google and very successful, so I never argue with a successful organization like that. But in most cases, I have found the hiring manager should own the hire. They are closest to the need, they are closest to what's necessary, and they need to own it. Now, they should take input from the other three on the team, and the book talks about how to facilitate that discussion. I've even facilitated some as an outsider when they can't agree. But at the end of the day, the hiring manager, in my view, should own it.
Perfect. All right, I've run out of questions. Does anybody want to jump in and ask another one before we end the webinar? It looks like that's it for the day,
Okay.
Jeff.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to, Jeff, if anybody had a question for you specifically, how would they find you?
Yeah, my email address, I'll give you my personal email address. It's really easy. It's Jeff, Jeff, at recruitrockstars.com. So the name of the book, Jeff at recruitrockstars.com. And I'm happy to
Wonderful.
answer questions or clarify anything, and really appreciate the chance to share this with such an engaged group. And I'll leave you with the fact that this is the hardest part of business, in my personal opinion. It is the most important. If you spend the time to get the right people on your team, A, you're unstoppable. B, you will spend far less time micromanaging and babysitting. You're going to spend your time on this stuff either way, either the front end or in the back end, cleaning up your messes and your hiring manager's messes. I hope you'll choose the former. And I'm very grateful for being invited to spend time with you today. And Tricia, thank you so much. And Bonnie.
Yep, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And if for anybody that has questions for me or HRC Suite, you can also email me at team@hrcsuite.com. And I will make sure that a recorded version of this webinar is available. I'll send a message out when it's finished uploading, and you're welcome to share it. If you have team members also that may have missed today's presentation, it'll be available for you to share. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.